Hi grade 8s. Today what we're going to do is we're going to start working with some integers, and what we're going to do is we're going to work on multiplication. And I have to admit, this is a little bit mind-boggling, and I'm going to try my best to hopefully give you some pictures and models so you can understand kind of why the things that are happening are happening. So the first thing I want us to do is we're going to work on multiplying a positive number by a negative number. And this is what I need you to remember, is that when you do this, your answer will be negative. Now the order of multiplication doesn't matter. Like 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. So therefore, if you had a positive 2 times a negative 3, it's the same as the negative 3 times positive 2. So it doesn't matter if the negative's the first one or if the negative's the second one. Okay, so first one or second one, you'll get the same answer. So a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive, gives us a negative answer. So how can I convince you of this? Well, let's try 3 times negative 2. So what does multiplication mean? Well, I've got 3 groups, and in each group I have 2 negative counters. So in your textbook, they use blue circles as negative numbers. So here's 1 negative counter, here's 2 negative counters. Okay, and I've got 3 groups of this. So this is telling me I've got 3 groups of 2 negatives. So here's my second group of 2. Here's my third group of 2. So how many negative counters do I have? You can see that I have 6 negative counters, and so therefore I would write my answer as negative 6. Positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. I need you to remember that. That's key. Now let's move on to the next thought. A negative times a negative is a positive number. And now this might seem really weird. So we're going to multiply things like negative 5 times negative 3. You can see this time, because we're using brackets, what happens is most mathematicians wouldn't write the multiplication sign in between. If there's no operation, so I want you guys just to remember this, if there's no operation, that is the same as multiplication. So therefore, if I write negative 5, and I have that in brackets, and then I put negative 3 in brackets, and there's nothing in between there, we assume it is multiplication. Okay, and it just makes our life a little simpler. So here's the key rule for this one. A negative times a negative. So I've got 2 negative numbers here. The answer is positive. And you might say, well, how does multiplying a negative times a negative produce a positive? Well, here's the best way I could think of. We've already learned that negative 3 times a positive 2 gives us a negative answer, which would be 6. So it's negative 6. Negative 3 times 1, we'll just multiply the 3 and 1, gives us 3, and a negative times a positive is a negative, so it's negative 3. Okay. Negative 3 times 0, well, 0 times anything is just 0. Now here, I want you to look at the pattern. If we had a number line here, here's our 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6. I want you to watch the pattern. You can see we started at negative 6 times 2, negative 3 times 2 was negative 6. Negative 3 times 1 was negative 3. We just jumped up 3. Negative 3 times 0 was 0. Again, we jumped up 1, 2, 3. Now, if you were guessing negative 3 times negative 1, because we're just declining here by 1 each time, you can see our next value that we would predict if we jump forward 3 would be 3. So 3 times 1 is 3. And a negative times a negative, here's the key idea. Negative and a negative is a positive, so we actually get positive 3. Same thing is here. We're going to move this next number. We're going to make the negative 1 negative 2, so we're just dropping in our pattern. We're getting 1 smaller. And what you can see here is 2 times 3 is 6. And you can see a negative times a negative gives us a positive. You can see in our pattern, makes perfect sense. 3 more ahead. So I'm trying to convince you here that a negative times a negative is a positive, and this kind of makes sense. I'm hoping you can catch that. Well, let's just review what we've been learning. Okay, if you have a positive times a positive, you get a positive. That's what we're used to. 2 times 3 is 6. Now, if you have a positive times a negative, like you would here, it would be a negative value. In this box here, if you had a positive and a negative, that would be a negative answer. And then in this last box here, a negative and a negative would give us a positive. So please remember those values. Really key here today. Have a good one.